I recently had a client that added international ads into its ad account for the first time, and we saw spend double. As it turns out, that is very similar to what happened for Ash Melwani, the co-founder and CMO of Obvi. You probably know Ash if you've been around the D2C space. And in this episode, Ash and I rap about how we have built out everything from the operational side of international building so that customers in different countries actually can shop in their own currencies and all those kinds of things on the website and get clarity to the shipping timelines and passport or to all the duties as well as the ad setup. So exactly how we are building our Facebook ads account to expand our ads into different locations, how many countries we're including, what's the campaign setup, all that stuff. You probably should be considering adding international into your business at some point soon, if not now. And if that's what you are doing, you will love this episode with Ash Melwani, co-founder, CMO of Obvi, talking international advertising on Facebook. Let's get into it. Ash Melwani is somebody I have talked to a lot about meta ads and e-commerce growth because we have a private little Slack conversation with me and him and a couple other folks. And in the conversations kind of go like this with me and Ash. They go and a couple other people in here. We say, how's this going for you? What's new? What new thing is happening in your ad account that, somebody will hit on something and then go, wait, are you seeing this also? And 8 out of 10 times, the answer is yes. Somebody else in our group is thinking about the same thing and pursuing the same thing. And today, that thing is international advertising. It's something I've never talked about on this show, I think ever. Maybe I've never even mentioned it. But Ash and I both, at about the same time, started exploring international ads for our clients. Ash is like a couple months ahead of me, I think, or for our brands and clients. And so we're going to break down on this episode what is working and how to go about, tactically, how do you go about adding international spending to your ad account and actually making that a decent experience for customers as well, all those kinds of things. Ash is the CMO and co-founder of Obvi. You have seen him around the D2C internet and the D2C world, and between Obvi and Chew on This, he is a known figure in the space. I probably don't need to introduce him a lot more. Let's jump into a conversation with Ash Melwani about international advertising. Ash, dude, thanks for taking time. I'm so glad to do this. We've briefly met once, but you and I were both chasing things around when that happened. And then you were speaking and I had a client that I was kind of hanging out with and all that stuff. And so this would be the most we've gotten to really talk, despite that I feel like I talk to you a lot.
Yeah, I know. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I know we had to reschedule a couple times, both busy schedules, but very, very excited. I think the original conversation was, to your original point in the intro, is that, hey, are you testing international? And you're like, wait, we should totally jam on this. So I'm very excited to talk about this because it's been in the works for a while. And we're finally seeing a lot more movement on this kind of opening up these channels in different territories. So excited to chat more about it.
So give people a sense of, before we jump into the details, just the quick details on Obvi, where you guys are at, anything you want to just kind of give people some context for. I think especially when you're talking about something like international, it's pretty helpful to have a sense of what kind of product, what kind of brand.
So Obvi, for those who don't know, it's a health and wellness company. We focus on collagen mostly, so different functional collagens. So you have your regular collagens. We have collagen for weight loss, collagen for detox, collagen. We have a couple new collagen products that are coming out, collagen greens, collagen hydration. So hopefully by the time this actually comes out, we'll be teasing those things. But
nice.
A lot of these products aren't typically, available internationally, or the selection is very limited. And it's probably the much bigger brands that you probably already heard of, right? Like your Vital Proteins are definitely international. Your Dr. Axe is definitely international. And those are the guys that were our main reason for entering this market, because they weren't doing anything special, right? They commoditized the space. We wanted to make it fun. We wanted to make it entertaining, tasty, and so on and so on. So when we obviously launched into the US, we had a pretty good reaction to it. We've been in the space for 5 years now. We've just crossed around 75, 80 million in total revenue. We have a Facebook community of over 100,000 members in over 5,000 doors nationwide between Walmart, Rite Aid, Vitamin Shoppe. So the US definitely wanted this type of product, and the demand is there. So we decided, you know what, why not test international waters? Just considering, one, Facebook costs over there are a lot cheaper, CPMs are a lot lower, and the fact that they don't get too many of these products out there is very disappointing. But another reason here is that shipping is such a big problem, right? So shipping, customs, duties. There's a reason why these international countries don't typically want to shop from the U.S. because it is expensive. So we've been able to kind of figure out a way to account for all of this, and now we're starting to scale into countries outside the U.S. And given we're heading into this weird timing where Q4 is about to start, elections are ramping up. The U.S. may not be the most efficient place to put your marketing dollars. Let's start finding other places to kind of deploy, and international was the place we wanted to test, and so far so good.
Yeah. Okay. So for me, for my client, I have a lot of questions about that. For the client that I was pushing on this with, it was basically, I actually can't talk too specifically here in this case, but what I'll say basically is a very different category with an opportunity that we saw to be international, looked to us like a product that should have some international resonance, got things set up, and then it was just very much like let's kind of turn it on and see what happens. Like it wasn't, I would say there's some strategic elements of like doing the operational side of things, but we really weren't sure what the opportunity was. And for us, at least in the last couple of weeks, and it's pretty early for us. We've really been pushing on this in the last month, but like 50% of our spend has been international. And I'll say more about how we did that setup, but it is only 16 countries that we're targeting right now. And so there's like, we purposefully kind of dipped our toes in the water of this a little bit and wanted to see if we could get things going before Q4. So when I lay that out, the thing that went off in my head, and actually, before, like right around the time we were scheduling this podcast, I was like, even when we had to push back and reschedule, I was like, this is actually kind of great because it'll allow me to have a little more time to spend and see what happens. Like we were, I think when we were first supposed to record, we had our international ads on for like 2 days. So now we're seeing a little bit more, and I can speak to a little bit more data, but I am very curious. I mean, my immediate reaction to that, when that happened for our client, my client was like, holy cow, this might be a monster opportunity. Now let's go figure out all the things we really need to figure it out. There is kind of a low lift way to test this. And I want to talk about that in a little bit. So for somebody listening to this to think about if this is an opportunity for me, there's some things you can do to sort of find out pretty fast, I think. But I want to like really get into a few different elements of this with you and hear kind of how it's gone for you. Cause you have talked about it. I think you even tweeted the other day something to the effect of like international's been like monster for you guys. Like it's been a huge opportunity. Can you talk a little bit about first of all, sort of like what percentage of your total spend is international, or maybe another way to look at it, like how much spend increase did you get when you flipped those on and started spending there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say now, honestly, pretty dead on with what you said, which is around 50%, right? And the reason,
I mean, that is so much, right? Like
it is a lot.
Like
it is
any brand spending. Like if you could, what we're saying is you doubled your spend like that. So that's interesting that your situation is the same as mine there. Okay. So keep going. So that's crazy.
So here's honestly, if you go back to, I would say end of August, right? We started to see the US, like just performance volatility wise, was like kind of just up in the air. We saw really high spend days and we saw really low spend days. And again, similar to Andrew, we're like fully all in on manual bidding. So our whole, we're up, like it's based off of demand, right? So if we started to see demand kind of come down in the US, we're like, you know what, we have to upkeep, top line revenue. We need to bring in profit. Where can we kind of like open up some more spend? And that was international, right? So if we were going to spend, say, $1 million just in the US, now towards the end of August, we're kind of like trending downwards, probably spending maybe 600. We were able to make up the other 400, 500 just in international and get back to where we were spending, right? So that's where we started to see Like it wasn't like we were spending $1 million and then we spent $1 million on top of that. I wish that was the case, but we were seeing some downward trend, and I think it had a lot to do with what's happening now, right? Elections in the U.S. Just in general, Q4 starting, and typically for us, we start to see a downward trend because it's not our time for supplements. It's really not our time. Q1, Q2 is really our time, so we see this trend, but it's still. I was thinking, you know what? We're also coming out of summer. What are some of the countries that are actually wintertime right now? And you're looking at the Southern Hemisphere, which is Australia, New Zealand. And so we're like, how can we hit this market? And so that's when we actually started launching towards the end of August, right? And to give you a little bit more context, what we've been doing a lot more this year is a lot of influencer stuff, a lot more stuff on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. And a lot of it is, some of it, I wouldn't say a lot of it, but some of it is also international. So we are generating a brand presence in some of these countries, even through some of the retailers that we are with like, for example, iHerb is a massive international destination for supplements. We already have a contract and we already have distribution with them. So there is awareness for Obvi in these countries, but we weren't running any ads towards any of these things, right? And then the other problem is shipping. So shipping to these countries is very expensive. Duties is an issue. Getting stuck in customs is an issue. So your customers aren't having the best experience. So typically you buy from them. If they're going to buy from you once, they're probably not coming back again unless you give them a good experience. So what we ended up doing was we knew we had to hit international to at least test it because there is a demand there. But how do we account for all these variables in which is a barrier for some of these customers to come and buy from you, right? So we partnered up with Open Border. Shout out to Darwish. He, if you haven't heard about Open Border, essentially what they do is they pretty much plug into your website. They adjust, pricing for local currency. They also help your 3PLs find the best shipping rates. They also handle custom and duties for you so that when it actually gets to these international countries, there's a lot less friction, right? And so one of the biggest things is trying to figure out how do we create a process that's super frictionless for the consumer. So taking our original landing pages and literally if we direct traffic from, say, Australia and New Zealand to this landing page, are we showcasing, the pricing in their currency? Are we within the checkout? Are we offering free shipping? Are we, or are we adding, shipping costs? Are we adding duties to their, to their orders or customs or whatever it is? What Open Border was able to help us do is, and this is something that I urge a lot of brands to do is when you've probably tested international, you probably see a low conversion rate. And the reason is because you probably have to charge a ton for shipping and you're passing that on to the consumer. Now, what we ended up doing is we know that we on average spend $22 for every order that has to go to Australia, which includes shipping, customs, and duties. Now, what we ended up doing is we actually took that $22 and rolled that into our pricing on our landing pages. And Open Border helps us do this. So it's dynamically
Ash,
updating.
really fast.
Yeah.
What was your AO on that $22 order or a $22 additional charge for shipping? Let's say you hadn't adjusted your pricing at all. What AOV would that have been off of? Probably.
Yeah. So that is on a $68 AOV.
Okay. So monster amount that you'd have to charge on top. Compare that to your US base. So like how much would you normally like what would that $22 charge be for a US order? Like in terms of your guys' shipping costs and all that kind of stuff?
$7 to $8.
Yeah.
Probably.
Okay. Right. So tripled, 2.5x, something like that, basically.
Exactly.
Okay. All right.
Exactly.
I'm sorry to cut you off. You were talking about what you guys did. So you used Open Border so that you could actually roll some of that into the retail price, right? So the shipping number you put it, if I understand what you're saying correctly, the shipping number you show to the customer is not so massive, but you actually are charging more for the product.
Exactly. It now becomes zero because if think about it, right? There's a reason why the offer testing is so huge. If somebody sees, all right, well, you know what, I'm charging $90, but $10 shipping, there's some friction in the checkout. It's like, well, I was already committed to $90, now I got to pay $100. But if you're showing somebody $100 up front and free shipping, boom, no other surprises during checkout, conversion rate actually kind of goes up. And so that was the kind of the.
Do you guys do that in the US too?
So for US, again, we're pretty much free shipping over a certain threshold, and similar for the international countries as well. Because one on a one time bought, like a 1 month supply, um, we do want to use the AOV bumping tactic. So on a 1 month supply, you're paying for shipping, but 3 months, 6 month free shipping offered.
Yeah, got it.
And
Okay, so
so
you're just
that
you're
allows
building
us
different
to
offers like that. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So this strategy helps. And so while our AOV in the US may be $68, for Australia and New Zealand, it's like 90, 95. But we also know that we have to pay out higher shipping, higher customs duties, et cetera, et cetera. But because we're actually able to improve conversion rate, our return in these international countries is way higher than our break even threshold, so that we're way more profitable in these countries. I would say on a contribution margin basis, it's very similar to the US, but it added additional scale and spend into these
Right.
countries.
So let me just walk that back. So what you're doing is you have worse margin, meaningfully worse margin, even if you bake in the shipping and duties and those things like that into the price. You have meaningfully worse margin overseas, but you get a higher in platform return. So your ROAS goes up basically, and you're able to do that at enough scale to where the actual like net, the actual contribution margin that you're generating per purchase works out to be about the same. You just go higher. So I mean, if you just assume contribution margin is a combination of ad spend and COGS or whatever, right? Your COGS go up, you just bring your ad spend percentage down, and you end up at the same number overall. Is that what you're saying that you guys end up with?
Exactly. And that's where setting, and now we can get into kind of like the account structure of things where, setting up for different countries.
Before we do that, I want to actually go backwards a little, because I do want to get to the account structure. And I actually I have a lot of detailed questions in here about how you guys are doing this, in part because I'm stealing your time right now to get advice from my accounts, Ash. So that's what's happening here. And we're just turning it into content. So one of the things I wanted to ask was, okay, so you have this increase in ad spend you mentioned that's happening during a downtime. So it's not like you're actually adding 50% or doubling to a forecast you were hitting. What you're saying, it sounds like, is you're able to meet your forecast by adding international. You actually probably hadn't forecasted international as part of it, but that ends up being what saves you to reach the forecast. There's actually something similar going on for a client of mine. But what I wonder about, just tell me what your inclination is. If that's happening during a downtime, what is your expectation? Do you think this will move? I mean, the seasonality is different. Like you said, you mentioned Australia, right? Like it's opposite seasonality. So there's that. It's got to make you salivate a little is really what I'm saying, right? For when your US spend comes back around to go oh man, this could get crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I think just Australia and New Zealand alone, right? The thought process there is that it's winter, but now you're talking about opening it up to UK, Canada, other English speaking countries, and so when our time truly comes, which is Q1, I do feel like it will give us an opportunity to continue growing year over year, right? So for example, we just had a board meeting, and so this year, because of retail efforts, because of a lot of things, we're up 100% year over year. Now, how can I add more next year? Just on the D2C side, right? We're going to grow just through retail efforts and things like that. But where am I going to grow on the D2C side? I can't spend more in the US because I feel like we're kind of hitting this plateau. And the only way to really increase that is by, diving into different channels. But allow that, right? Let's say, getting into, you said you guys were in 16 different countries. We've only really hit 1 to 4 countries right now. And now we're testing more. And so that is my
interesting.
answer to how
your entire international increase is in 4 countries.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that makes it even more promising, right? Okay, all right. Okay, let's back up a little bit more then. So what 4 countries? Australia, New Zealand, what else?
UK, Canada.
Do you have a feel for which one of those is the most dominant and the most value additive to you? It's okay if not.
I'm going to regret saying this, but it is Australia. Australia, New Zealand. I do feel like Canada performs very similar to the US.
Yeah.
UK also, it is also very tough. There was a lot more
Yeah.
changes we needed to make to the current funnel to get UK to work. Whereas with Australia, New Zealand, Canada, it was literally just duplicate, change targeting, and start running ads.
If you are growing your e-commerce business and you need to find incredible talent for your team, I do not know, and I mean this, I do not know why you would not consider hiring incredible e-commerce talent for your brand and your team from the Philippines with my friends at More Staffing. More Staffing is the Philippines-based staffing agency that will help you recruit, onboard, train, and provide ongoing coaching to incredible talent from the Philippines for your business. And that is because, and the reason you should do that is because there's a large pool of talent in the Philippines, people with deep e-commerce resumes across every part of the organization. I'm not talking about just like virtual assistants. I mean like really highly talented people from the marketing side, design side, through the supply chain side, like every part of the business who can come into your business at manager and above level positions. You can pay them above market wages in the Philippines, which would still be below market wages in the US. It is a way for them to win because you provide a great opportunity for them, and for you to win because you keep your OpEx lean by hiring internationally. And More Staffing is the way you get access to it. I've worked with More Staffing for over a year, used them to build up my own team in various parts of my business. On the agency side at this point, I recommend them so gladly to everyone. They are some of my most trusted partners in e-commerce, and I really mean that. So go to morenow.co/AF, morenow.co/AF. If you're trying to grow your team, you want to do what is right for an e-commerce business, which is keep your OpEx lean, but you need incredible talent to your team, which you do. If you have a growing team, you should go hire at More Staffing. Go to morenow.co/AF to get started today. Is your margin meaningfully different from one of those countries to another? So let's just take those four. Like, could you theoretically, and I don't know how you've built this actually, but could you theoretically drop all four of those countries into the same place and end up with similar enough margin profiles to where you could just run them all together?
It's a great question. It is different enough because the
duties?
CAC targets for, because each country is different. Yeah. Duties is different. Shipping is different.
Yeah.
The CAC targets for each country is different, which is why I'm separating by CAC target in the account. Okay,
that makes sense. Yeah. And if you're running cost caps or bid caps, you got to do that, right? Because your AOVs are going to be different and your margins are going to be different. So CAC and cost caps and bid caps are going to be different. TROAS might make that a little easier, but it's probably going to, running highest values, probably just going to really disproportionately push your spend towards some places than others, wherever the AOV is higher, because it's gonna optimize for the higher AOV. Okay, so what about for open border? You mentioned that because I'm going to work back out here from there into the campaign setup. So you mentioned open border. Did you go and really think about that setup? We've used Passport with a client of mine. I think it's a similar product. Did you basically go with them and really build for these specific countries, or was it the kind of thing that you could sort of flip on and it worked across the board? Like, how strategic were you is really what I'm asking with building the operational side of things for these particular countries?
Yeah. So I think each country needs its own love, just because when we originally tested this, it completely flopped. Right. And the reason it flopped is you see the intra-funnel metrics stay the same as kind of the US, maybe even better. But once you hit checkout, there's a massive drop off. And the only reason you can think that or assume that is because you're charging for shipping, you're charging duties, you're charging customs. They realize it's priced in USD. There's so many problems. The one thing that I said to them was, I don't want any of these customers who are shopping above a certain spend threshold to see any added costs. Right? Because on my landing pages, the way that I've built them is, if you buy a 3-month supply, 6-month supply, we're giving you free shipping. We're giving you everything. And so what we needed to do is, because of obviously the currency differences in terms of the exchange rate, duties is different, shipping is different. Each country needs to have a price change that is different from each other. So for Australia, we have to increase the price by X amount to account for all these 3 different fees. In the UK, it's different. Canada is different. So open border pretty much set up 3 different profiles and pricing structures for these different countries.
One for each country. Yeah.
Exactly. And so now when we do want to introduce something else, we have to understand, okay, well, what is the duties charge on this, AOV? What is the shipping cost on this AOV? And then adjust for that, because people see a price for the first time and they're sold on it. Once they get through checkout, you're adding additional fees, they're out.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, especially the kinds of fees. I wonder if there's like a middle ground that you could treat it more like the US, where you show the price a little bit lower to start, but then you add $5 shipping, $10, something that is not so, like something that's more normal to people. Although it'd be interesting to see what sort of standard practices for businesses in these different countries. Like, I don't really know what the answer to that is. So, okay. So you're really going country by country and you see the opportunity in those places and going and setting it up. Okay. So you were saying now when you look at the opportunity for how you're going to grow your D2C business next year, what you're looking at is going like, okay, I got to open up more countries. I'm assuming that's what you were saying when I rudely cut you off.
Yeah, I think that's probably the next step here, right? So especially with Australia, New Zealand, given how well it has done, I was looking at the ad account the last 30 days, just in Australia alone was 300,000 in spent, right? And so what I would say is, I think it's
crazy. Australia is like, I think smaller than California and popular. Yeah, 26 million. Like, it's just not that many people in Australia. Like, that is a monster performance.
Exactly. The thing with this is testing is a must, right? So we're constantly refreshing creatives every week.
Are you building any Australia specific creative?
So
or are you
at
just
first,
building your US creative and dropping it in everywhere?
Exactly that. But now what we're doing is we're trying to get Australian creators to kind of, enter our influencer ecosystem and not only kind of build on that end, but also get that creative for the ad account. And so it's a little bit more localized, right? So on top of that, what I was saying is if we're consistently seeing this scale, right? I saw a few tweets the other day saying like, listen, hey, shouldn't be forecasting based off of initial success. Totally fair, because when we first launched, it was like this, and now it's coming like this, and now it's plateauing, which is where we want to be. If it continues, why are we not opening up Amazon Australia, right? Why are we not opening up those channels? Because one, in my opinion, I think being on Amazon is incremental. So can we squeeze a little bit more juice out of that and enter those channels there? So that's one way of kind of expanding it. So getting into Amazon Australia, getting into Amazon UK, Canada. Now, all right, what are some of the other countries that we can get to? Obviously, the lowest hanging fruit are English-speaking countries, but what about the Spanish-speaking countries? What about, Mexico is massive for us in retail, but we haven't even touched it yet. But to be fair, it is primarily skewed Spanish-speaking. So a lot of our ads have to change. Our whole landing page has to change, things like that. So I think when we get into it starting next year, it's opening up these geos and really getting specific with creatives, creators, landing pages and things like that.
Let me tell you who the exact right customer is to be exploring landing pages and full funnel builds with Fermat. It is a brand who has products that appeal in different ways to multiple kinds of customers. So if you have one product that has multiple values to different kinds of customers, then you should be considering working with Fermat. I'll give you an example of this. I recently had an interview on my podcast with a CEO of a company where they had a lighting setup, and the light was really good for home offices, but they discovered that the exact same product was also really good for tattoo artists. And if you think about that, at the level of ad and at the level of landing page, it's really easy to separate those audiences at the ad level, right? You could create tattoo-based ads and you could create home office-based ads. But once somebody clicks on that ad, if you're just sending traffic to the PDP, you're gonna get the tattoo person and the home office person on this weird PDP that has this strange mix of all this stuff. And so what that CEO had found was that the more that their team built tighter, more consistent funnels all the way through to reach these different subgroups of customers, the more they would see conversion rates increase 30 and 40%, those kinds of numbers post-click, way better than any CRO test they'd ever done. That is the exact right use case for something like Fermat. Fermat allows you to build serious funnels with consistent messaging from ad all the way through lander and actually all the way through the cart. You can build custom carts, custom PDPs relative to each ad and lander at incredible scale because it is both the best landing page software of which I am aware. It is really robust. It loads incredibly fast for customers who click on your ads. And the testing environment that's built in for ongoing split testing is really smooth, really easy. Plus, they combine it with essentially an agency service where they will give you an account manager who will build the pages for you, bring all of their knowledge of what past tests have worked across all of their brands. So they come in advance to guide you to the right kind of testing opportunities for your business. And like I said, they'll build the actual landers and funnels for you so that you don't get bogged down with a really good idea that just creates a bunch more work for your team. You can move insanely fast and build really tight funnels. And when I've done it with my clients, we've seen doubling of spend as a major part of our work with Fermat, sending pretty much all of our ad traffic, at least for one of my clients now, who is exactly like the situation I described before, sending pretty much all of our ad traffic to Fermat landers. And we're really exploring using it across the entire site. Go to fermatcommerce.com/AF, fermatcommerce.com/AF. If you're getting serious about building landing pages and funnels, it is the best software and the best service of which I am aware. You should explore it today. But what it feels like to me, and this is similar to what I'm saying, is that the sort of cost to impact ratio of that calculation, like the bet you're going to make there, is that essentially it's a much smaller lift to go add a bunch more revenue in those places than it would be to add an equivalent amount of spend and revenue in the US. Like, it's just like you get those things set up and there's some work on the front end, but it's not a crazy amount. And if you could do that, you could end up like really adding a lot of profitable spend pretty fast. Like that's at least my feel for the opportunity in those places, that it's just like an outsized opportunity relative to adding the same thing in the US. Do you think that's true for you guys as well?
I agree. I think
like again, if you could, let's say you could dial for those 4 countries that you're already in, right? You could just sort of take the operational build better, right? You have a real method for getting influencers and creators in those spaces, and you do some translation if you need to, or whatever it is. I guess those 4 you didn't, should be fine on that. But like, you add a U to all your words that end in OR, so that you can, speak to the UK and whatever. But then if you want to do Mexico, like there's a world here, right, where you go to like Obvi.mx or whatever, and you actually get a translated site and all those things. Then that's a much bigger lift. Yeah. But once you have that done, and there's got to be a service that does this. Once you have that done, you potentially have a whole bunch more spend and a whole bunch more people you can reach on that side. And I'll tell you what, this is like the thing that's actually the most compelling to me about this is like, if I want to build a really big business, is that you can actually take that to another level, which is like what happens when you start setting up 3PLs and DCs in those countries, so that like you end up just like with really fast shipping, because you can ship from Mexico and Mexico. Like I remember hearing this a long time ago about Lumen, the men's skincare brand, that like in their early days, and I don't know how true this story is, but that like their founder, like a big part of his strategy was to build international from the beginning because the opportunity was so big. And you're shaking your head. I wonder, it sounds like you might've heard this story too, but or you're nodding. I mean, not shaking. And so it was like, I had heard something that they were like $120 million a year business, like a while ago, like when nobody was $100 million business in D2C. And it was like 40 million US. Like the bulk of the spend was elsewhere, and they had set up, I think I had heard the founder had taught himself Korean or something like that. Like, and so he was like actually building, serious, really good, really native stores and fulfillment in these different countries, and negotiating with 3PLs in their native languages. And because for him, it was like this massive opportunity to go do that. And I mean, maybe one way to look at that is if somebody told me I'll pay you $80 million a year to learn Korean, I would probably do it. So that's kind of where my head is going with this whole thing, is that I think it's possible that there is obviously some work involved. And I think for a lot of brands, they ought not go pursue this too soon, because there's just some like standing up of your brand, your value that you do. Yes. But I wonder if there is a possibility here and a pathway to growing internationally much better and much faster much better, much faster than people think. Like when you think about the idea that a mid 8-figure brand, sometimes like a good growth year is 20%. I don't know. I mean, like you just mentioned 100% year over year growth in general. That's obviously monster by adding a channel, especially by adding retail, basically. Man, what happens if you go international? That's the way you create giant step growth in your business. It's not just by getting a little better at the things you're already doing at that stage, in the mid 8-figure stage. It's by actually expanding your ability to reach net new people in places where they are, which is what retail is, brick and mortar is, right? It's that there's just a lot of commerce happens in person. And so if you're only online, you're going to leave those people on the table. That's fine for a while. You can grow a really big business doing that. But now you go, omnichannel for that reason. But I'll tell you what, I think that's probably a lot harder than international D2C,
Retail.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, that's at least my experience. Yeah.
Yeah. It's been challenging, but also having a good board is very important, just because and that's why we raised, not to get off topic, but that's why we raised at the beginning of the year, because not only did we need cash to obviously get more inventory, we needed, and one, we can get cash anywhere, but we wanted the right team and the right
for these large initiatives, right?
Exactly, right. You wanted the guys that know Target, you want the guys that know Sam's Club, Costco, and so that was a strategic race that we did. And so, yeah, to your point, it's very important, and it can create that growth. Like we just reset in Walmart now. With our top performing SKU, we went into 1,500 stores last year. Over the last 52 weeks, we were doing really well. They expanded us nationwide. And so that's a 3X in that business right there. And so now adding in, different retailers and, grocery we're getting into and things like that, it can drastically change things. And I think it allows us to spend even more online, because that is where the generation, the demand gen is happening. And you can kind of ease up on some of the targets as well. So it makes my life easier.
It makes a lot of sense the way you're framing that. We probably should. I actually am interested in talking more about one question about when you guys used Open Border and you stood up the operational side of things and the sort of customer experience side of things before flipping on the Facebook ads. And I've had the same experience as you, by the way. Like if you don't do all that stuff, people technically can buy internationally, but it's a terrible experience and they don't.
Yeah.
And in my experience, by the way, at the Facebook level, in fact, the CPC is way lower. CPMs are way lower, but conversion rate is a lot lower overseas as well than you get in the US. And so it ends up being really worth it, all told. Now, you may have solved the conversion rate thing in the way that you've sort of built the offer, which I think is really interesting. Definitely going to go back and think about that. How long did it take you guys to sort of build out what you needed with Open Border to make that customer experience work? And similar question, are you shipping from your standard US 3PLs when you do?
Yeah. So to answer that question, yes, we're shipping from our standard 3PL. The setup, I think probably 30 to 45 days. Like Open Border came in, they connected with our 3PL. They essentially now help them source the lowest or the most affordable shipping rate possible, because they scan multiple carriers. So they're, in that sense, you know that you're getting the best price. The way they also do it is that they kind of bulk batch all your orders that are going to that country, so you get even more savings too. And then just on the dev side, on the front end side, is making sure that pricing is dynamically updating and things like that. So honestly, probably a month to 2 months, depending on how fast you can move, how fast your 3PL moves. Any content you want to get created.
How much of your time did that take up? Did you have to get really into the weeds with that? But it sounds like, you had to think about that offer building, but it sounds like also this Open Border did a really good job. They should be paying us for this. It sounds like they did a really good job of making this happen.
Yeah, no, they did. They really did. Shout out to Darwish. And to your previous story, Lumen, Darwish was actually at Lumen, and that's kind of what inspired Open Border.
Oh, no way. Okay. So,
yeah.
Right, so
that's interesting. That's what he wants. He wants all of these brands to go and hit international and make it, a big chunk of revenue, but they did a lot of heavy lifting. The only thing I really did was yeah, I got to make some changes on the offer. Can you guys do it? Yep. Cool. Done.
That's I mean, that's just like the dream, a relatively easy lift with things that can have a really big impact. That's awesome. All right, let's go to the ad side of things, because I think people will be really interested in that. So tell me, so let's just talk about the campaign setup. So you're running manual bids in the US. First question, running manual bids in international as well?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. And then do you have each country broken out into its own campaign, or do you have how are you doing that?
So the way that I thought about it at first was to initially go by country, right? And so I was like, you know what, Australia, New Zealand, similar audience, similar, seasonality. Let's group that, right? I think New Zealand audience is way too small to be targeted alone. So group that with AU. So that was the first test. When I did that, that was a separate campaign, right? So our typical structure is I have a scaling campaign, I got a testing campaign. So I literally made an additional scaling campaign. I duplicated my main scaling campaign, kept all the same ads, just changed the targeting to Australia, New Zealand. And I lowered the bid a little bit just to see where we're at. And day one, it just started ripping. And it was the craziest thing I've ever seen in my life. Obviously, it goes after the kind of the low hanging fruit, the people that are very in market and kind of know about your brand. But it was actually insane. I think we like 3x revenue that day. And it was something that, it was nuts. But again, we were monitoring the margin very closely, right? We knew where our break even was, and we were well above it. And so we just continued where we were at. We kept the bids where they were at.
Let it rip.
And we're like, you know what? The next week, let's launch the next country. Canada was ready. UK was ready. So we launched Canada. Canada didn't do insane volume like Australia did, because it's very similar.
This is what I normally see with
US.
Canada. There's some value there, but it's typically rarely like a real difference maker.
Exactly. So it's efficient spend. It's probably an uptick in a little bit, but again, something that you kind of set your bid, let it rock. If it spends, great. If it doesn't, whatever, right? Then the following week was UK. Again, separate campaign. So now I'm separating by region just to keep it clean. If I were to do this again and maybe restructure it, if it kind of like takes a dip, is I would probably put Canada and UK together, because the CAC targets are similar. AU and New Zealand are different. So like I said, I'd probably do it by CAC targets, but UK is, when we launched the first time, completely flopped. And I believe the reason was because the pricing that was being shown on the front end showed USD, right? And it was translated into, okay, well, this is what the price is in USD. And then they would have to calculate for themselves, well, how much is that in GBP, right? And so we saw a drop in conversion during checkout. So we're like, all right, before we give up on this, let's redo the landing page. Let's recalculate, okay, well, this is what the price should be in pounds. This is what we should be saying, I guess, the British are deal seekers. So can we add in a free gift on, the 3-month supply, 6-month supply? How can we make the offer better? And so those changes helped us get CAC down in the UK and actually made it a viable channel. But like I said, not every country is going to be duplicate the campaign, push live, and you're printing money. It's, you gotta make sure you understand the consumer behavior of each of these countries, because they're way different from the US and they're way different from each other. And so keeping an eye on, your intra-funnel metrics. Well, all right, from adding to cart to getting into checkout, is that, in line with what you're seeing everywhere else? From checkout to actually completing your purchase, where's there a drop off? What is the drop off? Are they seeing, extra charges that they shouldn't be, like customs or duties or VAT? How can you account for that and maybe build it into the price point that they initially see? And so there's a lot of changes that are to be made. It's all very simple stuff, but it allows you to kind of scale a bit further. But to answer the question, the account structure is, different campaigns per country or per CAC target. And then we also have a different testing campaign for each country. We're testing the same creatives, but we're testing them separately for different countries, because again, different people are going to react differently to different pieces of creative. So you might have a winning creative for the US, which may not have won in AU or UK, and then vice versa. You might have one that wins in the UK, but not in Canada. So we want to make sure that we're giving everything a chance, and not just like, oh, well, this worked in the US, let's go and deploy it worldwide. So that's the account structure.
Yeah. Okay. So what we did partly as a way to just test this as fast as possible, and even actually get some data back sort of from some real sales to figure out where our margin was coming in at, because some of these things you sort of guess at, but like, for example, it can be really hard to predict the AOV. One thing we've seen that's been really interesting is that like CPC and AOV are like wildly different in different places, depending on all kinds of different factors. CPM in part, but then also just like, actually, because we duplicate every campaign that we run to have both a lowest cost and a highest value version. The lowest cost with bid caps, the highest value with TROS targets. And one of the interesting things for us with the international thing is we've seen some highest value, some countries work better in one rather than the other, that like essentially in different places one of them is getting more reach than the other. And that's very similar to what I see with like US based accounts in general. Like some accounts I run TROS and bid cap side by side, and my TROS campaigns get all the spend. Other places it's like 50-50. Other places my bid caps get more spend. And so, or other brands, right? So that's sort of happening at the country level within one brand. And one of the things that's been really fascinating for us is like on the highest value side, like we are clearly reaching some rich people in some places, because there are some countries where like we're getting double the AOV in this other country that we would get in the US. Like it is doing very different consumer behavior. And for those people, the highest value campaign is going right after them. So it's kind of all over. So what we did was we launched with 16 different countries, and there was very little science to it. We picked some of the obvious ones where there's plenty of English speaking and stuff like that. We tried to cover a lot of different regions of the world. So it's like we had Australia and New Zealand in there. We had Canada, that was an obvious one. Mexico, because the shipping is close, in both of those places. And then, added a few European countries, added a few South American countries, put the UAE in there just because I thought, there's probably a mix of people there in the Middle East, seemingly some money. I don't know. And just kind of like did that. And then stayed away from a lot of Asian countries, mostly because of language issues. Most of those places there's just less English speaking, and then this is probably a really important thing here. Stayed far away from China and India, and entirely because they're so big that it will just eat up huge amounts of spend. And in India, I've seen this in particular, and in some other countries, I've seen the CPMs be like 2-cent clicks, because their CPMs are so cheap and just traffic that does not convert. And so I would think of places that are that populous as sort of being their own strategy, and you'd really want to be able to control the spend volume separately in those kinds of places. But that could be wrong. I just would want to be able to see it separately, because it's just, again, we said Australia was 25 million people, India is 1.5 billion. So it's just like a different universe. So we will put all 16 countries into both the lowest cost and highest value. And then what's been interesting is the actual distribution of the spend, giving Meta the freedom to pick between those countries, has been very similar to what you just described, Ash. Like really heavy Australia by far the number one in this, and the best performing as well. Then UK, then Canada, then actually for us is Mexico, which is interesting. So I'll be curious what happens when you guys go to Mexico as well. Despite that, as you said, Mexico, that's Spanish speakers. Obviously there's some English being spoken there, but it's overwhelmingly Spanish speakers. So
did you make changes for Mexico, like different ads, different landing pages?
No, because all of those countries are in the same campaigns. So it is like 16 countries, one campaign, and I'm just letting Meta go find people, basically. Now, there's some ways in which this is creating some problems, like different AOVs means you need different CAC targets, et cetera, different duties and things like that. But what our plan is to do is I quickly got on the phone with an operations, logistics, supply chain person in the company and said, hey, let's keep spending. We'll try to keep it somewhere around a number that we think is going to be at least break even. And especially for this brand, we wanted to be ready for holiday. And so it's like, let's get data back from where some of this stuff is coming in at, analyze these orders, and then go, okay, what targets do we need? And what I think we probably will do, to your point going forward, is end up splitting things back out over more time. But the thing that makes me so excited about this is like, I'm turning around to this brand and going like, hey guys, we probably ought to turn around now and like make this like the major effort of 2025, essentially solving this problem. Because if this is a possibility to double our spend, like that it could be a huge impact. Plus, once you've done the front end of the work, right, there actually isn't that much ongoing work to keep it going, at least to some level. The front end is where all the work is here. But once you have things set up, then it's like, okay, great, we've got it. Now, at some point, maybe you do go spin up 3PLs in different countries and relationships to where you actually improve all of this over time and really build a lot of time and effort into it. But for us,
which I think is a big point for retention.
Yeah.
That's the key for retention. It's not like, okay, well, it's not necessarily, you don't have to go like the month after. Like if you find in 6 months that, people are like, you know what, I'm ready to buy again, but like, I don't want to wait 2 weeks for me to get the product. I think that's something where you have to do that consumer research and survey, like, hey, like, well, one, why haven't you bought again? And if the main reason is, well, I like the product, but I don't want to wait, X amount of time, then there is some signals where it's like, you should get out there and have some type of presence there.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I mean, anything you can really do to make the customer experience better is probably a good idea. Like if you can just go figure out how to make it so that it's like, hey, if we can reduce your shipping costs and reduce the price of the product, then we can get it to you faster. And retention and acquisition, both, I think there's just, and plus, like if you can figure out a way to do that, that actually creates more margin as well. Like that's just the real game changer, because if you already know you can get a really high return on the ads, like, man, it's really big possibility. Look, the US is 350 million people. There's a lot more people in the world. And the possibility of being able to reach way, way more of them is just a very, very big deal, I think. Okay. I have all kinds of thoughts about next, but I think what we should do actually, Ash, is you keep working on it. I'll keep working on it with my team, and then we'll see you here in 3 months to like circle on it.
Part two.
We've got just a few minutes left, and here's a question I like to ask people when there's just until the end of the conversation. Okay, tell me what is the top thing besides international that's on your mind about meta ads or about just D2C growth? Doesn't have to be meta ads. D2C growth, e-commerce growth, retail growth, any of it. Like what's like top of mind for you that you can just sort of leave people with as like a good thought to chew on?
Yeah. So I love what you did there. I think the biggest thing for us has been focusing on organic. So how can we build more organic visibility for our own social profiles, but more so, how do we get more into like influencers? How do we nail creators? How do we get TikTok Shop to pop off, right? I think the brands that are crushing right now are the ones that have, dedicated creators, the ones that have, a very engaging social profiles on TikTok, Instagram, et cetera, et cetera. So while we may have like a really engaging community just through Facebook, there's not a lot of discoverability for that, right? I think Meta is going to continuously go after low-hanging fruit for the most part. I think figuring out ways to open up your top of funnel, getting more eyeballs into the brand is going to be super beneficial for people now. I talk to a lot of people now, and it's like, listen, everybody who's running ads on Meta is running conversion objectives, right? It was built for bottom of the funnel traffic. It was built for middle of the funnel traffic. There's a reason they have brand awareness campaigns, reach campaigns. It's because you are meant to fill your funnel. Now, can you get a better CPM outside of Meta? Yes. Can you get it through influencers, TikTok, building on your own organic social profiles? 100%. So don't rely on just Meta to grow your business. Yes, you can get it to a certain point, but if you're trying to scale to that 50, 100 million, 200 million, it's not going to be done on just Meta. It has to happen elsewhere. So I think the biggest thing on my mind for the next year is how do we get influencer to really pop off? How do we get other channels involved? How do I bring more eyeballs to the brand, CTV, billboards, out of home, whatever it is? That's what I'm focusing on, and let Meta do what it does and capture people that are ready to buy. You just got to fill the bucket.
Okay, so next week I'm having Jack Rubin on the show for the third time, who's the founder of Purdy and Fig. And he just tweeted something really fascinating, which was basically like, hey, I resisted going omnichannel with my advertising for a really long time, focus on meta. But then once we added omnichannel, and they're mid 8 figures, like that's a monster business. He's like, once we did that, once we added omnichannel, we saw like 300% growth in spend at the same profitability or whatever. He had seemed to have sort of unlocked it after waiting. And now I think I'm going to get to this with him. And so subscribe right now if you're watching or listening to this, because that's going to be a good conversation. If you've heard my interviews with Jack before, you know how insightful he is and just how great he is. Like you have been in this conversation, Ash, about sharing real data. But the possibility there is really fascinating to me, and it just seems like people are finding ways to win like that more and more, while being really conscious of the fact that their spend needs to produce profit. If you can combine those two things together, like getting really good, and again, for most brands, I think this is like really a mid 8 figure time to do it. Like what I tell people all the time, and what I'm curious to ask Jack is like, what I want to ask Jack is, if you go back, would you have done this earlier? My instinct is that most people shouldn't diversify their ad spend until they're in that sort of mid 8 funnel stage, because getting good on Facebook and getting awesome at it is hard work, and pays off really, really big. And that's usually the next best place to spend your next dollar for a long time. But there is a point where it's not, where it actually is better to go somewhere else. And so, yeah, I'm really fascinated to jump into that there. So Ash, thanks. Great thought to leave on. Perfect lead into a next episode of mine. You should get more of Ash's thoughts by following him on Twitter at Melwani. I'm going to link that in the show notes, of course, and see all the things that is happening with Obvi there. Ron from Obvi also shares a lot of thoughts there, and of course the whole D2C sort of thought leadership and crew at Chew on This, which Ash is also part of, is also something you should go check out. Podcast, newsletter there to stay on top of everything that's happening in the D2C space. These guys are really in the conversation in a lot of different ways. So if you have liked this episode with Ash, you should definitely go follow up and get more content from him. Ash, thanks so much for your time, man. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me.
Yep. All right, we tried to get tactical in that conversation. There's a lot there, but right when I hung up, I reached out to my client who's doing international. I said, hey, look, Jessica had a conversation with Ash. I really think we could be considering putting the main part of our resources in 2025 into building more international ads, because I think it's that big of an opportunity. So I think there's a huge opportunity here, and I hope that episode was helpful to get you started. Do follow up with Ash. He's a great follow on Twitter, and make sure you stay up with his content. Of course, you can stay up with my content by subscribing here, and don't forget to follow up with my sponsors, with Fermat and More Staffing. They are awesome. Go check them out. Links for those are in the show notes. Go to ajfgrowth.com to see everything that I'm doing. You can reach out to me at podcast@ajfgrowth.com or on Twitter at Andrew J. Ferris. Thanks so much for watching or listening, and I'll talk to you next time.